Well, welcome to all of you who are here today on this Monday, as well as anyone who is tuning in later on the YouTube archived video. Welcome. This is the bookend of our series that we have been hosting through the United Church of Christ Science Technology Network, which we have called Science for the Road Ahead. Um, we spent the last 7 weeks talking about the reasons why we can't do things, essentially. Um, I'd never frame it like that, but that's really what we've been saying. And helping you to understand the science behind the recommendations so that you can make the best decisions for your congregations and for yourselves. And hopefully, this is my ulterior motive, to plant a little seed in you to fall in love with science and the scientific method and all of the glorious wonders of the world. And so hopefully we've done a little bit of that. I know our science technology group on Facebook has grown almost more than doubled since we started this. So thank you. Today we decided that as we have ended with all of the things that we can't do, that we would spend just 1 hour talking about all of the things that we can do. We've been forced into some uncomfortable situations, some uncomfortable circumstances. Early on in the pandemic, we were kind of forced to be enthusiastic and energetic and creative and come up with all these new ideas and try new things. And for most of us, I'll speak for myself, that energy just somewhere in May, I'd say, where I'm like, I don't want to do any of this anymore. I want to do the thing that I'm used to doing. I can't handle any more innovation and all of these really excited millennials telling me how to use Zoom and Facebook Live and all of those things. Myself being an enthusiastic millennial, I'm sorry for that. But here we are now. Right now, it is the end of August, and for all intents and purposes, we are, as a country, moving in the wrong direction. And so we're probably going to be doing this for some time. So let's talk about the ways that we can not only survive in this time, but thrive. The ways that we can not only figure out how to do the old ways better, but to embrace new ways of being church together, doing worship together, new ways that are designed for this reality. Okay. And I have talked with a whole bunch of you, a whole bunch of folks around the world in my various clergy Facebook groups and my colleagues nearby, trying to collate all of the best ideas that you've had and all of the best practices that you've done, and to give you a little presentation on that today. Now, after I'm done, we're going to have time for questions. We also want to have time for you to share what you're doing and maybe some things that I didn't mention in here. So you can type that into the chat box, into the Q&A box. This is not quite a Q&A. Ruth thinks that she's able to actually let you in on this. We've never tried it before, so it might work. It might not. But because I'm a pastor, I've got 3 takeaways here, and they all start with the same letter. And in what I have been feeling in the past couple of months, I think what this technology is asking us to do is to embrace interactivity, embrace informality, and embrace integration. So that's interactivity, informality, and integration. And I'm going to go through a number of different categories here. We're going to talk about worship options, adult education, and spiritual care. Those are kind of 3 of the main things that pastors do. And in each and every one of them, I want you to be thinking about how we are embracing interactivity, informality, and integration. Okay. So first and foremost, our worship options. This is kind of many of us well, I'll speak again for myself. I told my congregation pretty early on that I can only do a couple of things well. I can do a whole lot of things poorly, or I can do a few things well, and decided that what I would focus most of my time on is our worship experience, since that's what most of our church members, the only way they engage in church anyway. And this kind of presents the best opportunity for meeting new people as well. Um, so we looked at the different options, whether that be Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom are kind of the big three that people have tried. There's some pros and cons to each of them. So if you're going to live stream a service, whether that's with people present or with an empty sanctuary, but doing it at a set time on a Sunday morning, then Facebook is really good because it sends notifications to everyone who likes your page, who is just happening to browse Facebook at that time, as a reminder that, oh, church is starting. I get these on Sunday mornings, and sometimes I'll tune in for a couple of minutes. So you have a chance to hook people. You also have to be on Facebook for it to work. So I personally have found that I have a large amount of people in my church who don't have Facebook accounts and who are like morally opposed to getting Facebook accounts. They don't want Zuckerberg to know about them. So they wouldn't be able to access our page and see that. YouTube is the other one. YouTube has more forgiving copyright protection. If they sense that you have some copyrighted music, they'll just demonetize you. Sometimes Facebook will delete your video entirely. That's happened to some colleagues of mine. It's more accessible, but it's also harder to get to, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's more accessible that you don't need an account to sign in to see it, but it's harder to get to because you have to remember where to go and when to go and how to get there. There's not as many reminders right in your face. Zoom, I have heard some really enthusiastic things about. The people who have done Zoom worship have really enjoyed it because it allows way more personal opportunities for folks to talk back with each other, to interact with each other. Now, you can interact in the chat boxes in Facebook and YouTube, but you can interact face-to-face on Zoom. I know a lot of churches will still have that fellowship time before and after, or have like a coffee hour time afterwards where people can stay and talk, and that has been really important for some folks. And that's actually something that I have been trying to work into my church services for years now, the interactivity piece, because for I don't know how long we've had this sage on the stage mentality where you come to church, you watch the people up front, which is typically just a pastor and the music people, and they tell you all the things you need, and then you go home. Even the way our pews are set up is set up so you never see anyone's face but the performers up front, and you receive and then you go home, right? We always talk about like, oh, I wasn't being fed at this church. And that kind of ridiculous church language that we sometimes use. And that comes from that culture of just taking and taking and receiving as a church. What I think Zoom Church is doing for us is helping us to recognize how much more beautiful and authentic this expression of church can be when people are having back and forth. So you have the opportunity, if you're doing a live Zoom worship, to have a shorter sermon, but then ask people for talkback. That's something I've done in person in church, but it's really hard for some people to get the guts to speak in front of people. But to type a comment in the chat box or to raise your hand in Zoom and say something back, how this hit you, a story you have, a question you have for clarification, all of that is so unique to this technology, and something that I think maybe we, after this is over, we need to find a way to reintegrate into this. I've actually heard of one church who has a sister church in Germany, as many of the German Reformed churches out here do, and they did a joint Zoom service with their German church. So this American church and a German church got together at some time that worked for both time zones and had church together Like, you could never have done that before this pandemic. And if you had even suggested that, if you'd have said, well, instead of doing Sunday morning, we're going to do this weird thing from our couches, nobody would have come, and it would have been mutiny. But now we're all doing it anyway. So here's an opportunity to reach out and do these just bonkers things and try them out. And they may end up being the best service you've ever had. They may end up falling flat and the technology may not work, but goodness gracious, what a great sermon illustration that will be later, right? So I have not live streamed a single service since we started. I have 2 loud kids, and my wife is also a pastor with a different church. So we have no childcare. We have no family nearby. So it did not make any sense for us to try to live stream on Sunday mornings because they would just have screaming children in the background. So I've been pre-recording everything, and then I'll just put it up on YouTube the night before and then schedule an email and a Facebook post to send out the next morning with the link to the YouTube video. This for me has been a lot more life-giving because it's given me an opportunity to learn some video editing tips and tricks and some kind of, like when I'm planning out my sermons now, I used to just plan out the sermon. Now I'm planning out what kind of pictures and videos I can integrate into it. I did a sermon this week. This week in the lectionary text, we were talking about Jesus in Caesarea Philippi, and Peter's confession that, you know, you are the Son of the living God. And in my research, I just went down all these rabbit holes the way that I do about Caesarea Philippi and about Paneas, as it was known before, and the temple of Pan that was there, and the worship in that bottomless pool that was there for thousands and thousands of years, and just this holy mountain. And so I wanted to do a history lesson sermon, and usually those fall so flat because I can't hold people's attention about history for too long. And then so instead I worked in, let's see if I have this, can I pull this up? Yes, I can. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay. Are we seeing this?
We are seeing it, but I think, Zach, you need to enable sound somehow.
Got it. I want to take you back a lot longer than 1972 when that was built. No, before this was a tourist destination, it was a holy mountain, one of the holiest mountains in a region that has more holy places than they know what to do with. Mount Hermon is visible from almost anywhere in northern Israel. Its snow-capped peak stands. All right, I'll stop that. But that's kind of an example of piecing together like drone footage from the Israeli tourism department and whatnot. So like I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. And I worked in, I spent a whole bunch of time watching YouTube tutorials and learning how to do this because I wanted to be able to have illustrations. One of the other things I can do is, because I'm pre-recording, is like I wanted to show people my tomato plants in my backyard. So instead of talking about my tomato plants, I took a video on my phone of me walking through my garden and explaining my ridiculous tomato plants. Like I can do that kind of integration when I'm pre-recording a service and I have time to edit it out, edit it all together. It really has helped with my illustrations. Another thing that I did at one point is I had people send me pictures and videos of what was beautiful from their windows early on in quarantine. And then my wife and I recorded our own version of What a Wonderful World and set those pictures and videos to that song. You're not allowed to post the recording of it, for copyright purposes. I couldn't put Louis Armstrong on there, but I can do a cover of it and put it on there and then have that be a part of the service. So getting your church musician or something to record even just an instrumental, and being able to collaborate with your church, have people send you pictures and videos and all of that, and then put them all together. In terms of collaborative music, there's this program slash website called Jam Kazam, Jam Kazam, and I'm gonna send out my notes to this so you can have this. It is a musical collaboration program which allows musicians to jam together in real time. The only caveat being you need a decent computer with a wired internet connection, and you have to be relatively within the same geographic location. So there'd be too much latency to jam with someone in Japan, say, but somebody in a different part of the state or other musicians from your church, you can put together like a worship night or a hymn sing with Jam Kazam and live stream this to your Facebook or YouTube page, working with your choir in that way. You can get like 4 people together, so maybe like a quartet. I watched a service the other day, in preparation for this, in which it was a pre-recorded service, and they had done a Zoom interview with an expert on the topic that she was preaching on, like the week before, and then spliced in a part of their conversation into her sermon. Because she's like, you know what? I could try to explain what this means, but better yet, I'm going to bring in this person. And then boom, there was an expert talking about it. And she had just done it the week before. And it was like 10 minutes of this expert explaining what, like, way better than anything she could have done. I saw somebody else pull a local, like, community leader on, and they did like a forum in the middle of the sermon. And that's, you would probably not be able to get this person in on a Sunday morning, typically, if you were doing it on Sunday morning in church, saying, hey, local congressperson, would you mind coming to church on Sunday morning in our church? And they'd be like, well, I could do it in 8 months. But if you say, hey, can I get you for 30 minutes on Zoom and we can talk about this thing, it is so much easier to get people to have these kinds of conversations. And then to be able to just splice that right in to your service, really does it adds this dynamism to your service that was really not possible when we did this formally and in person. So take advantage of that fact. Some of the things we've learned is that maybe our in-person worship services were too long before, because I don't know about you all who've been putting this together, but we've had to cut out certain parts because they're not necessary anymore. Different processionals, recessionals, the different various accoutrement of a service. And I have kind of universally heard from people that they appreciate that. The digital format lends itself to, 30 minutes is a good amount of time. And, maybe that's something that we can realize, that we can cut out a lot of the in-between stuff that we church nerds love, that most of the people in the service really are just waiting until the next part to come. Some of the things that we've done, we've replaced, my wife's church has replaced her call and response liturgy with call and response American Sign Language. And when they do like peace be with you, they do the peace and also with you language, which has worked really nicely for them. One of the things that I'm doing is, oh yeah,
Yeah,
Ruth.
we should say that your wife's church is back worshiping in person.
They were for a week,
Oh, okay. Oh,
and
that's right.
then
They had to go back. I forgot
they
about
had to
that.
go back, and now they are live streaming on Sunday mornings with nobody in the pews.
Okay.
So they're still doing the sign language because they want it to be, when they do go back, that it is normal, right? So I'm going to share another video with you real quick to show you what we're doing instead of doing call and response. The Lord will provide for our needs. to this day to the table of the Lord, for here we will find welcome and sustenance. So I bought like 60 frame drums for the church, and we are, when we do come back together anyway, these are going to go to the people, and they're going to decorate them as they want, put their names on it. That's their drum, and we're beating our heartbeats. In affirmation of the liturgy, we are affirming our common life together and the spirit of life that binds us all with the. I also have little shakers for the kids. I've seen folks as well going back to the old ways of worshiping with embodied movements, bowing, signs of the cross, signs of the fish, this kind of almost high church because it's nonverbal. I've seen churches using small projectors that they got, $100, putting it off to the side and using it only for enhanced visualizations. Maybe a feed from the Zoom call, so people who are there can see the people who are home, or the chat window, or just pictures of pretty things during the music, because our sanctuaries are typically plain as Protestants. So for the people who are not able to come to worship and also don't have computers or internet, which is probably a sizable amount of people, what we've been doing is we've been burning DVDs and mailing them to them. And we found that there's only three couples who don't have access to the internet and would like one of these. Another option that you can do, there's a website that was recently created called sermonbyphone.com. It was created by a pastor's spouse, I believe in the United Methodist tradition. And what it is you sign up for their service, you pay $10 a month, and you get a phone number. And then you upload your weekly service or sermon to their platform. And then people can call that number that you give them. It stays the same, and it's a local number. And then they can hear that service or sermon on their phone. We are probably going to be setting this up soon, because I know we have at least one member whose daughter-in-law plays the YouTube service and holds the phone up to the speaker for her. And so this would be an easier way for her to be able to call it up, put it on speaker, and then sit and listen to the service that way. It's $10 a month, and it's almost infinite amount of people can listen at the same time. Not that we're going to have a huge amount of people calling to listen to the service on speakerphone, but it's another option. There was a church also who put together a tablet ministry. I don't know if anyone has heard of this, where they bought a bunch of cheap, like Amazon Fire tablets or something, and customized them so they could only do one thing. That being, like, you turn it on and you push the one button on the home screen and it brings you to the church's YouTube page. And that's it. It's the only thing it does. So that these people who don't really use anything can pull it up. And they had paid for like the data connection for it or something like that. I haven't looked into that one because it hasn't been a necessity for us. But what a wonderful way to show people that you love them, right? To be like, here's some technology and here's how to use it. So worship. That's a lot I just threw at you. Some of that you already know, some of that maybe you don't. But I want to move along to talking about adult education, if that's all right. Unless, Ruth, you had anything you wanted to add about worship real quick.
Well, I was going to say, I have actually done all three of the above. I was doing YouTube, and we actually did an old-fashioned radio play by recording a Zoom call that I then spliced into a worship service for Holy Humor. I've done the Facebook live streaming when I preached at my home church, and now I'm using Zoom for the church that I'm the current interim pastor of. And one of the cool things about Zoom is that you can use Google Slides. And so the Google slide will hold the reading and responses and that kind of thing. And you can also embed a video into a Google slide, which then plays so that people can sing with the video at their own homes. And it has worked extraordinarily well for the last 2 weeks. And now the music director and I are going to be playing around with some additional ways to incorporate music into the service now that we know that we're going to be doing this for a while. It's worth learning and growing. One of the things that we're also going to do that they have not been doing is we're going to start recording the Zoom services, and then I'm going to edit them and put them up with content on YouTube so that people who aren't on the Zoom call for whatever reason can access it. But I'm also really curious about the sermon by phone thing. I think I might be investigating that. That's very cool. I had not heard about that.
Well, it's a really good point you bring up too about the recording the Zoom call for people who can't come, because one of the things that I've heard for years is, I'm so sorry, Pastor, that I haven't been in church for a while, but I've been scheduled every Sunday morning,
Mm-hmm.
or it's my one day off and I have such a hard time getting out of bed. And I have no judgment against anyone who has that. In college, my roommate used to pull off my covers on Sunday mornings and force me out of bed. He'd say, "You're going to be a pastor. You have to go to church." I want to sleep. I love Sundays. So I get it. I get it. Actually, I've been looking at my YouTube stats for my church, and every week during the pandemic for the first couple of months, the average views got later and later and later and later. And very few people are getting up at 8 to watch the sermon anymore. But so the whole, like, you have to be in the church building at this time, dressed in this way, prepared in this way, with kids under control for this amount of time in order to participate in the life of the church. Like, that's the way that church has been. This provides us with the opportunity to create asynchronous church. And I have a lot of friends in education right now who are creating asynchronous hybrid models of education. Yeah, asynchronous just means not on a certain time. Not everyone has to do it at the same time. So what I'm putting together for the fall is a 3-pronged church experience of sorts. I'm a huge nerd. A huge Bible nerd, a huge ancient world nerd, and I have been wanting to create a Christian ed program for my church based on the space between the Testaments that sets up the life of Jesus. Because my goodness, when you understand all of the political and socioeconomic and religious developments that happened during the Second Temple period, it totally changes the New Testament, and it becomes this revolutionary document with these, and I don't need to go on about that with this crowd, I'm sure. So I'm creating 15-minute YouTube videos for like that span the during the fall, and then the Sunday services, the scriptures for those days will be based on that lesson. So if you watched the YouTube video, then Sunday service will be like, oh, okay. If you didn't watch the YouTube video, you'll still get something out of it, but it'll be a little insider piece. We will have like a Zoom study where we'll watch this video together, and then we'll take it apart and we'll talk about it. And then that will also be available. So people can watch the 15-minute video, they can watch the Zoom call about the video, and then they can watch the service on Sunday. And then the third piece of that is that we'll be doing a Lectio Divina podcast based on the scripture for that Sunday. Lectio Divina is ancient way of studying scripture in a more contemplative way, in which you simply read the text and you listen for a word or that comes up, a phrase that comes up. Google it if you've never done it before. It lends itself very easily to creating a podcast based on this, where I have the 12 texts or whatever it is, and I email them to a bunch of people in my church, and I say, hey, can you record yourself on your phone uh, reading this verse? And then I will then put them together with some pretty background music that my organist will play and release them every week. And so people can have this contemplative spiritual time to sit and listen in a quiet moment in their house or in their car or wherever it is, to the text, which will be the Sunday text, which will be further elucidated in our background studies. So I'm trying to integrate all three of these because it's something that I can actually do now. Before, it would be like we'd have one crowd at the adult studies on Sundays. We'd have a different crowd on the Bible studies on Thursdays. We've had another crowd on church on Sundays. And any time I've tried to integrate all of them, it only ever made sense to the two people who came to everything. But now we can get everyone involved in all of the different things. So as you're planning what's next for the next church season, think about ways that you can create multiple ways of looking at it and then expressing them outward. I can Anchor.fm is free podcasting. They don't charge you anything for it, and they have some really helpful tools for getting it out into all the platforms. You don't have to be like me, who builds an entire studio in his basement for podcasting. You can just do it from home or from the church. So that's what I'm doing, because I'm a nerd who wants to create all of my own things. But if you don't have that kind of time or energy or skill or desire to do that, there's plenty of stuff out there for you as well. Theworkofthepeople.com has a whole bunch of videos, of short films, of courses that you can have for your church, and you pay a monthly fee. It's kind of like Netflix, and then you all can watch it together, give people access to it, and then talk about it together. For a more rightnowmedia.org is another one that is a much more on the conservative side. I think it's made by mostly evangelicals, but they have a lot more content, which, having come from the evangelical world, I can tell you is a thing that we tended to create a lot of content. Both of those two sources, one being more mainstream Protestant and the other being more evangelical, are the same kind of model, where it's online video, you pay a subscription fee, and then your people can watch it together. You can also just use free YouTube videos. Did you know that in your church's YouTube page account, if you have one, you can create a playlist of other people's videos? You can go through YouTube and you can curate all of the best TED Talks or channels like Religion for Breakfast, which is a wonderful channel that takes a look at religion in kind of quirky ways. And you can create your own playlist for your own adult studies programs. And then you can just give people the link to that playlist from your church's YouTube page, or embed it into your website. And you can just use what somebody else has made that's already on a streaming platform, that's already free and accessible, and then build your adult ed Zoom classes on what's already been done. And that way there's no real boundary, a wall to entry. It's not like you have to buy a book and then read it, and you have to figure out, okay, I got these DVDs and I have to mail them now to the 12 people that are interested. It's right there and it's available to people. Ruth, do you have anything to add to the adult education before I run through spiritual care?
Well, it's funny you mentioned TED Talks, because many of you know that I write courses for Pathways Theological Education, and TED Talks and free YouTube videos have been wonderful. And if you're interested in in deepening people's understanding of some of the fields around religion, things that touch on religion, I highly recommend Crash Course um, as a source for things like philosophy and for history and that kind of thing. They have some really good things, and they also have some really good science videos. So if you wanted to do something to help people understand how your church should be making decisions at this time, search out some good videos on the scientific method. There's all kinds of them. Some of them go into the history of it, some of them just go through it. Um, but that could be a good way of educating your congregation about the ways that you need to think through together how to be church safely at this time. Um, and I do also want to say, while we're on the topic of doing church safely at this point in time, there's a question about what video editing software you use, Zach.
Um, I use the cheap version of Sony Vegas. Get what it's called. Um, what is it, like Movie Maker or something? Vegas Movie Studio, I think. It was like $50. Um, I've heard good things about now it's
Well,
gone.
DaVinci is one that I've
Da
heard really good
Vinci, that's
things.
the one I've heard good
Yep.
things about, because Windows got rid of Windows Movie Maker, which was a pretty good free service before.
Right. And I use iMovie, which has accommodated all of my needs. I did try to get into the pro movie makers, and that was just beyond what I was willing to learn at that point in time, especially once I realized that I was going to be changing churches and not needing to do the videos as much. Um, but elsewhere in the chat, a question had come up, or a comment had come up about not having the time to learn how to use a good video editing software. There are tons of tutorial videos about almost every video program out there. Some of them are done by the publishers of the software, and some of them are done by people who use these software programs all the time. So, you know, if I were doing this and I hadn't been thrown into it with the I have to have something for Sunday and I don't have time to think about it, um, I would set myself a goal for a date that I'd like to use something new in, and go watch some tutorials and play around, because the reality is you're not going to mess anything up. You know, the keep your original clips. Most movie makers will do that for you. You're actually importing them, but you're not touching the original file, thank God. So play around and experiment. I mean, I did some really, really funky things in the first few weeks, and I actually learned a photo editing program halfway decently too in order to do things. I can actually touch up my own portraits now. Um, but but and the other thing to do too is, you never know who in your congregation either knows some of these programs or might have a relative on the periphery who might be willing to help out, and it might be a way of inviting people to become more involved. So, ask, never hurts. Um, and also, if you have a VOTEC program that has a broadcast department, or your local high school has a broadcasting department, they may have some kids that need internship hours or service hours, especially for those honor societies. You just never know.
Yes, and I will say, you do not need to be able to like edit together one of those virtual choir videos. Or I did a video early on where I spent like 6 hours teaching myself how to track motion in in the video editing program, so that I could virtually hold up a dinosaur and a chicken and move them around and they'd follow my hands, because I thought it would be a funny illustration, which it was, and it kind of worked. it was mostly just a long time spent on that. You don't have to do that. You probably shouldn't. You should probably spend your time doing something more productive. But if you can break up the monotony of one camera focusing on one person talking the whole time with like doing your call to worship from next to a stream, or breaking it up in that way. This is like for the pre-recorded ones. If you're just doing one continuous thing in your sanctuary, that's fine. I'm just trying to uh, give you some ideas about what's possible. Um, Also acknowledging, and I should have probably acknowledged this at the beginning too, that we're still in a crisis. We're still in actually probably moving into more of a crisis than we were in March. And so if your energy levels are low, that's fine. You don't need to be at this like super high excited level. There's no judgment if you don't do anything that I'm suggesting and you continue doing what you've been doing. That's fine too. Just trying to take some of the thought out of trying to think up what's next. Um, which, by the way, we should probably start talking about what we're going to do for Christmas, shouldn't we? How cool would it be to work with like the Church of the Nativity and and like do some church with Bethlehem? That would be fun.
Yeah.
So, spiritual care, I think, is the one that is hardest, honestly, because so many of our tools as pastors are like touching and being present with. I think when I was doing my CPE chaplaincy work, they said like the best thing you can say when you walk into a room is often nothing, which is great when you're present with them. But like if somebody died and I just don't call you, that's not the same thing. Um, so some of the things that I have experienced in my church and in talking with other churches is that they have developed letter writing committees. I've got like 5 or 6 women at my church who make cards for fun. And they have stockpiles of greeting cards that they've made with their stamps and their cutouts and all of that. And like getting them mobilized to sending out cards, not just when somebody is going through something hard, but just to say hi. Right. And I need to say this up front too. Don't be the person. You are not the person that contacts every single member of your church. You are not making hour-long conversations with every person in your church every day of every week. You can't do anything else if that's all you do. So you get a group of people who commit to doing that, who make phone calls on a systematized way, who write letters. Um, my my head elder has organized a Tuesday night guided meditation on Zoom because he had found a bunch of guided meditations and wanted to try it. So at 7:30 on Tuesdays, 7 o'clock on Tuesdays, I don't know. I've never actually gone because my kids won't let me. He has guided meditation. They're going to be doing some socially distant Tai Chi and yoga, because the light yoga, not like the heavy, difficult yoga, but the kind that are just slow, focused movements, things that won't require any speaking or singing, but just some deliberate movements together in a space or an outdoor space. But the whole, if I just have say one word of wisdom about the spiritual care part, is you cannot carry everyone. You cannot carry everyone. Everyone is in crisis right now. Everyone is. And like Reverend Worley said last week too, that with trauma, fresh trauma will bring up old trauma. And so we might be reacting very poorly to what's happening now because we are still processing what happened back then. And so we're not equipped to do that work with every single person in our church. And you need to be okay with that. And to be okay with lifting up a small group of people in your church to do that work, to free you up to do the other work, the work that only you can do. like responding to people who are truly in crisis, or putting together these church services, or the myriad of other things that we are supposed to be doing. It's just easy to feel like we're not doing enough. I think it was Nadia Boltz-Weber that said that pastors are doing twice as much work and being half as effective. And most of us are really good at guilt and making ourselves feel awful for that. Um, so I'm hopefully able to give you some permission to not feel as awful. You can feel awful if you want, I guess. I just hope that you don't. To answer Catherine Irwin's question, do I know where he found the guided meditations? I have no idea. He came up to me and he said, I'd like to do guided meditations on Zoom for people. And I said, go. Do it. I want no part in organizing this. I want you to take care of the whole thing. Go for it. Here's the Zoom information. And he has. Ruth, do you want to add anything about spiritual care?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that whole thing. When we shut down, and I think most of you know the story in North Conway, was we actually shut down before the state of New Hampshire shut down because our school district closed. So as it happened, our last Sunday service was the 15th of March. We had a congregational conversation about that. I tossed the sermon. We need to have this conversation now. And the consensus at that point was the school district's closed for 2 weeks. We will not have worship in the sanctuary for 2 weeks. And we trust you, Pastor Ruth, to do something. So, we did something. The next day, we already had a deacons meeting scheduled. And at that deacons meeting, I gave them lists and I said, these are your people. I want you to talk to every person on this list or contact them in some way so that they know, A, we're not having church on Sunday, B, we have postponed the candidating Sunday because that was coming up on the second week. We were closed at that point in time. We got closed to in-person worship. Be very clear about that. And C, to let them know that you'll be contacting them again with information about how to find us in wherever I figure out how we're doing this, and make sure that they know they can sign up for the church email list. And that went really, really well. And most of the deacons called through that list a good 5 or 6 times over the course of the time that I was still there. Sometimes just to catch up with people about the candidating Sunday and that kind of stuff, and how that all wound up happening, but also because they could tell that there were several people that just needed the company. And I did say, I'm going to be focused on this, but if you think somebody needs a call from me, let me know and I will reach out. And I did, and that's how we stayed in contact. I got really good at trying to grab the phone before anybody else in the building did when I saw that it was parishioners calling, because that was my excuse to talk to them, because it was like, oh, okay, now I can give myself 5 minutes away from worship prep, editing video and that kind of thing. And sometimes those turned out to be really, really good conversations. I was fortunate I had a pastoral associate who was doing a lot of the extra support and that kind of thing, but there were times that I did that. And I think the other piece of it is, I'm new. I have the perfect excuse to call down through the directory, but I've already reached out to some of the folks in the congregation. I've actually did my first in-person pastoral visitation since January. Last week, I went and saw a couple and an older member of the congregation, and we sat appropriately distanced and that kind of thing. And it was really good. It felt like, oh, I'm finally doing my job again. And in the back of my head, I had to silence that. It's like, no, you've been doing your job. Yeah, just differently. So I think that's part of it. So we're setting up a lot of porch visits. I'm going to spend, God willing, the beautiful month of September and early October visiting on people's porches, both to get to know them and to talk with them about interim stuff while I figure out how to make the interim process work in this virtual world. So that'll be an interesting experience.
Yes, it will. Um, So I see Barbara's asking if I can find out where this church member found the meditations, and I can certainly ask him. I did a quick Google search for guided meditations and found about 1.6 million results. Um, this just to say that a lot of these are uh, the ones that he's doing are the ones that are designed to make you more aware of where you are, and the ones that focus on, feel your toes and feel your feet and feel the weight of the day, let those things go, and then bring you through the mindfulness of the body. But I can certainly ask him and send that along as well after the fact. Um, so just to kind of summarize everything that I shared, the things that I have done that have worked for me, that other churches have done that have worked for them, some things that didn't work for me but worked for other people, or things that worked for me but don't work for other people. In it all, I think that what this time offers us is interactivity, informality, and integration. Um, we have the opportunity to interact with people um, in ways that never have before. And like somebody pointed out to me a while back that when previous generations had come home from school and gone to their various devices, they typically have gone to devices that were consumption based, radios, televisions, um, even video games. Younger people now, they come home and they engage with media that is interactive 100%. Even video games now, they all have some online interactive component. uh, Everything has to do with engaging. Like, you watch television, you watch the news, and they'll have like a feed of Twitter of like, what are the people saying about this thing? We can't do anything without talking about it with other people. Like, I've watched people who are like enjoying a meal and they're like, well, I have to tell Instagram about this. We can't just sit and consume anymore. And I think that's great that we want to interact with it and share with it. So if we can find ways as the church to embrace that in this time, that will do us very well, whether that's having a Zoom coffee hour after church, or uh, broadcasting the chat on a service, or having people pre-record things throughout the week and send them to you, whatever that looks like. In terms of embracing informality, and this might be the childhood Baptist in me, that one of the big stumbling blocks for people coming into our church services is the formality of the thing. And just even getting up and getting everything together and getting dressed and then coming into a space where we don't understand the motions and the movements and the people, and it's overwhelming, and a lot of people just don't come back. That boundary is gone. We are just in the same space as everyone. And so in any way that we can embrace that and make people feel comfortable, make them feel like they are included and wanted and a part of this, and that they don't need to know the secret words and passwords and beliefs and creeds and all of that in order to engage, the more we do of that, the better. And then embracing integration, whether that's being multi-platform or thinking about our adult education, spiritual planning, our worship planning for the Sundays, figuring out ways that we can integrate that among the various works that we're doing, knowing that it's no longer it's no longer stopping people. That there's no longer a hindrance, that you have to come at this time or you miss it. That now you are much more free to integrate your various programs and the things that you are doing together. Just giving people the time to do the thing when they can do the thing, and then feel like they are all a part of it together. So I think those are the three things, if I can boil it down, that this opportunity presents us with. And I've seen a lot of you doing this, and it's been really inspirational for me to be watching all of your services and trying to put together these lists and figure out what works for you all.
And I'm going to tag on to the integration piece by saying this is the opportunity when it comes to children and youth and faith formation to integrate intergenerationally. I'm actually thinking that when I sit with my new faith formation folks, I'm going to suggest that we find ways to get some of the older members of the congregation to do things like read the Bible stories on video, and to invite one-off FaceTime calls or Zoom calls between families, um, so that the children and youth can continue to build relationships with people of other generations, even though we're not in the church building at the moment, because that, I think, is the hardest hit to our faith formation uh, goals, at least for me, is to help people of all ages learn together and learn from each other. So that's something that I'm thinking very carefully about for this next season, and especially where they kind of got cut short and didn't get to finish a Sunday school year, and so I want to make sure that they're supported for however long this takes. But also, kids are going to be spending a lot of time on screen learning, and so how do we find ways for them to learn that's not on a screen but is still interactive and still gives them the opportunity to communicate with people that are not their family members. So lots of things there. And shout out to all of the faith formation folks in the conferences who are doing this work, and to the Association of United Church Educators for their resources. And I'm sure that there are things posted on your conference websites. And I know Karen Zeal and the faith formation staff here in Southern New England have been doing a lot of work around that. So check out your conference websites for ideas for that.
Can I just, Suzanne had posted in the chat that
Mm-hmm.
her people don't want Sunday school or youth group online. Total refusal.
Yep.
And if I can just acknowledge that
Yeah.
for a moment too, that these kinds of suggestions are not always welcome. When Nicole and I first started doing our services together, because we're both pastors, so we just did our services, the same service, and gave the same service to both churches from our dining room. We tried to do exactly what a Sunday service would look like, just from the dining room, and not changing anything. And because that was most comforting to people. And I think for many people, just seeing you in the sanctuary doing the same thing that you would have always done otherwise, complete with all of the various calls and responses and bells and whistles and lighting and bowing and whatever that you would normally do, just doing everything in that way, will probably feel comforting to a certain subset of people. And they will probably not be thrilled if you're talking about changing that. How does the quote go? Because I would be remiss if I didn't quote Thomas Paine at some point in this series, that the introduction to his pamphlet Common Sense says a long history of not considering a thing wrong gives it the superficial impression of being right. At first, there will be a sizable outcry in the defense of custom, but tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. And I think that might apply in the situation we find ourselves in. We are past the point where the novelty of this is sustaining us. And I think we're reaching a point where we need to figure out how we're going to keep ourselves moving. Because I personally get no life out of that kind of worship service where we just do what we would have done otherwise and pretend like everything is normal. And that's me. So I know for my own soul, I can't lead that service. I have to be thinking about what this present moment offers me. And finding that balance between the people who find comfort in that and the people who find comfort in watching me go through the motions as if everyone was there is a pastoral care nightmare. And it's, I think, where most of us are today. So you are not alone,
Yeah.
and you are not alone in not making everyone happy
Yeah.
either. Um, I think we probably all have had people leave our churches so far. Some people have told us that they're leaving our churches. Some people have just left silently. But you have this community. We're all trying to work this out together. Let's take a deep breath. And yeah.
Yes. Yes. And we do have one last open question,
Oh,
um, which is also from Suzanne. It's how many hours a week do you spend recording, editing, etc.? So, Suzanne, I can say that the very first week I did this, so the week of March the 22nd, was a 75-hour week with a diaconate meeting on top of it. And that 75 hours was me figuring it all out. By the time Easter rolled around, it was taking 65 hours because I knew what I was doing a little more. By the time I was finishing up in North Conway, the services were shorter anyway because it was summertime. But also my editing skills had gotten better. And so it was probably total, including the sermon prep and everything, probably 35 hours a week. And my normal sermon prep is 20, just from beginning to end. And that includes working on the next one in the series because I do 2 to 3 weeks at a time on my prep because I think in series. I know my colleagues laugh at me, and there are people out there who would be shocked to know that I don't have Labor Day Sunday planned. I will, however, be planned out until the Christ the King Sunday by the end of this month. So, uh, but that's how I work.
wow.
Yeah.
um,
I am open to the Holy Spirit moving in the meantime, but
when I
so,
first started, it took me about 20 hours a week to edit because we were doing all of the things we were doing normally. And so I had a lot of images to put on the screen, a lot of words to put up on the screen. I had a lot of editing I had to do with audio and video and call and response and this, that, the other. Since the past couple of months, I have scaled it down significantly. My services are about a half hour. The liturgy was what I showed you with the drum. I we're recording just on a single camera. Prior, I had purchased something called a Video Mic Me from Rode. That is a wonderful microphone that I'll show you right here. Can you see my screen?
yes.
This microphone right here is it just goes right onto your phone and it records great audio. It was like $50, and then I just would do it mostly in one take, and then I would just cut, do, and then when I got the music and the words in, the editing took me 2-3 hours. I got to a point where it was a lot easier. So I'd spend 40 minutes recording, 2-3 hours to edit. And then it takes like 5 hours to render the video, but I'm walked away at that point. And so I've gotten to the point now where it is not a sizable tax on my life to do this work. It was when I first started, and it made me want to quit. But I'm at the point now where it's much easier because I have found like what works for this medium and what is trying to fit this into the old medium, and this just doesn't work anymore in this way. So
Right.
there is
And I
hope, and I
yeah,
hope that helps.
yes. And I do think that, um, those last few services that I did in North Conway were moving from the old to the newer structure, that kind of thing. And so those did not include hymns, um, per se. They included music, video stuff that was pre-recorded. So it was mostly it was editing the videos before I dropped them into the master video. That was the longer period of time. But we thank you all so very much for your time. You will get one last email from me that'll probably come out later this week or maybe early next week with the link to this video, and with all the links that I've put up in the chat, because Zach will send all those to me, and I'm sure he'll get new try to get the information about the uh, guided meditations and that kind of thing. And we will hold on to this mailing list so that at the point in time when we have additional ideas for some webinars and some time to do it within the national church, you'll hear from us. And you know, if you've got ideas, you now have my email address, so send them to me. Or join the network and pop them up there, because there's all kinds of ways that our faith intersects with science, and we'd like to talk about all of them. All
Thank
right.
you, Ruth. And
Thank you,
thank you all
Zach.
who joined us today and all weeks prior. We pray that God blesses you in your ministry. And remember that this is all 8 of these videos will be available on the United Church of Christ YouTube page. There's a playlist there. Feel free to share with your church, share with anyone that you think could be helped by any of the work that we did in the past 2 months. So God
All
bless you
right.
all.
Blessings, everybody.